Alright, so that's us live now. You're wanting to discuss natural law with me, specifically about conflict avoidance and whatnot.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to understand exactly um, how you think we would derive conflict avoidance um, in natural law.
So I think it's the other way around. It's not that we are starting from natural law and getting to conflict avoidance, it's that natural law is about the necessary norms, you could say, which arise from the norm of conflict avoidance. And the way we get to conflict avoidance would be through something like argumentation ethics, say.
So I heard you in like a prior stream talk about how you get to conflict avoidance by way of like how you define law. Could you kind of like explain that?
So yeah, I'm saying that the law essentially is really dealing with conflict over scarce means. It's you would need to go to arbitration and stuff when there's a dispute over how something should be done. Really, it's the only reasonable way to talk about what the law is. It's like if you and me we lived next to each other and we had some sort of dispute over who owns a cow, which is on one of the properties. Well, that's a conflict over a specific scarce means, i.e., the cow specifically, right? So it's all these legal disputes, they're disputes over scarce means, i.e., conflict.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, to me, the reason why I kind of believe that conflict avoidance is uh, necessary to make a founding kind of idea for natural law. I suppose it's probably a weird way to put it, but is it just seems to be a self-evident truth. And would you say that's kind of axiomatic in that nature?
Yes, certainly axiomatic in the ultra-libertarian sense, in that, to try and deny that as the root of law, you'd find yourself in contradiction.
All right. You still hear me?
Yes, I can.
All right, just making sure. So do you know anything about mathematics just in general?
Yes, I do know at least a bit about mathematics. I suppose we'll see if it's enough.
So, I am actually digging deep into um, a concept here. Let's see if I can find it. I had something I wanted to read for you real quick. It's very short. So, have you ever heard of Gödel?
Yes, is it going to be Gödel's incompleteness theorem?
All right. So, if you already know about that, then there's no real point in explaining that to you. How do you
I think,
feel?
but I would just, I think I'll steel man it just to make sure I do understand it in the way that you do, and also so that the folks at home know what we're talking about. So
Yeah.
like, incompleteness, as far as I remember, it's basically no system in which you can do arithmetic. Well, in any given system which you can do arithmetic, there will be true statements which are nonetheless unprovable.
Yeah. I think it's less that they're unprovable and more so that they're like dang it's really hard to kind of like explain this, but like that they're self-evidently true, but you can't like kind of justify them exactly, or
I
and I guess that could be unprovable, but
I think it's, well, when I hear the word self-evident, or the term self-evident, I suppose I should say, I'm looking at that from a very Austrian viewpoint, where it's self-evident because in trying to dispute it, you would have to presuppose it. So the action axiom, we could say, is self-evident because if you were to try and dispute the action axiom, you'd have to engage in human action to do so. So that would prove that man does indeed act. Whereas incompleteness is applying to something like the twin prime conjecture, where there are these things called twin primes, where there are two prime numbers separated by a single number in between, I think it is. That might be wrong, but it's something like that. And the conjecture is that there are infinitely many twin primes. Now, it might be the case that incompleteness is in our way, where we are unable to prove that there are infinitely many twin primes, but it might still be the case that there are infinitely many. It's just we couldn't prove it.
So is proof like a positive notion of proof?
Um, I don't know what you mean by that. I mean, just like in the mathematics sense, you couldn't go from
Hmm.
any sort of, you can go from like number theory and then, well, you might be able to, but if it was that Gödel was standing in our way when it comes to the twin prime conjecture, it would be that we couldn't just go from base mathematics and show that it has to be the case that there are infinitely many.
So what I was wondering is, do you think that this, if it is true, and we presuppose that it was true, would it have any implications on other logical axiomatic systems?
I don't think it would necessarily, because there might be something like Gödel in praxeology, but that would need to be shown to be the case, because Gödel's incompleteness theorem is specifically to do with um, systems where you can do arithmetic in them. And you can do arithmetic in mathematics, but you can't really do arithmetic in praxeology. So Gödel doesn't apply to praxeology. There might be something analogous in praxeology, which we aren't aware of yet, but it's Gödel itself doesn't apply to praxeology.
Hmm.
At least that
Um,
if I'm remembering Gödel correctly, I might be misremembering it.
so yeah, that kind of clears up a lot for me. I also I also want to like understand if someone were to define law differently than you were, how would you dispute that?
I would just go over exactly like what other reasonable definition of law is there? It would be I use this term a lot, a warped ontology, to say that law is anything different, i.e., they have this definition set which is just completely balls to the wall off, just insane. It'd be like if I suddenly started saying that bananas, instead of referring to a instead of referring to a curved fruit, sorry, they instead refer to a red fruit which is round, and apple now refers to the yellow curved fruit. It's like, well, what are you doing there? It's whenever anybody's talking about the law, it's to deal with these disputes. And you could have perhaps different legal systems, and you certainly can. You can have a positive legal system where it's something like if there's a dispute and it's between a ginger and a non-ginger, then the ginger ought to win out always. That would be a legal system, but it would be an irrational legal system and an unnatural legal system. This is where natural law comes in. This is the law which arises basically just entirely out of logic.
So one thing I like to argue with people, because I still am not, fully versed on the derivation of natural law, and I kind of think I get the gist of it, especially now that you've cleared that up. But I like to prove to people, or not necessarily prove in the sense that you would say in the Austrian sense, or the empirical sense, but kind of just get people to anecdotally admit to themselves, and this isn't necessarily an informal debate either, but you can observe that people kind of act with some idea or conception of there being a natural law. And one example of this, like just in the past couple of days that I've seen, is people arguing that the actions of Russia or China are illegal. I mean, how can a statist,
Yeah,
claim this?
uh,
It seems counterintuitive.
yeah, I absolutely agree. People have this intuitive notion, and in fact, this is where Thomas Aquinas got to natural law from. He was doing it in a very religious sense of the word, but he was saying, well, I don't think God would have it that people who have never heard of his teachings, I don't think he would have it that they would be in a way blocked from greatness. So he thought people were imbued with this innate sense, this innate ability to determine what is right and what is wrong. So, and I think there's truth in that, because people, they just intuitively understand that it's bad to, murder people and whatnot, no matter what the state says, unless it's their own state, and then sometimes they have all this brainwashing. But if you do it with an enemy state, I like to bring up the example of the Holocaust. When I especially use this a lot in taxation debates, they'll be like, "Oh no, taxation isn't theft because it's the state doesn't say it's theft. They'll say it's not against the law, but then I'll say, okay, right, did the Holocaust involve any murder? And then they'll say, well, yeah, it's a whole lot of murder, and I'll be like, well, I mean, on the German defense at the Nuremberg trials was, well, this was not against the law because under German law, their Jews had no rights. So because they had no rights, we were allowed to do the Holocaust against them. So then the prosecution stands up, and they're like, well, it might not have been under German law, Jews didn't have rights, but there's a higher law than German law, and that law says you're not allowed to murder people. And I happen to agree with the prosecution there. The prosecution was making a very strong natural law argument there. Of course, they wouldn't apply it to themselves, but that's often the case with these statists. I think it's the Ninth Amendment as well of the US is very natural law focused. It makes reference to rights which are not held in the Constitution, which implies that, and even the First Amendment, it says the freedom of speech shall not be infringed, rather than freedom of speech that we're making up now. It's saying, no, these are pre-existing rights. We're just trying to recognize them in this document. So I think there is a very strong intuition and tradition behind natural law, especially in the West.
Yeah, I think the turning point definitely probably was the Enlightenment, at least in the modern day for that. But even still, if you look at law throughout history, people have tendencies to outlaw murder, for instance, and theft amongst each other. And I think that you can gather a bunch of supporting evidence to this, but I don't think it can really prove anything. But I think to any average person who is unconvinced, I think it can be very convincing.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, it's just this it's the problem here is the state's propaganda and their supplanting of natural law with positive law. Because I think most people have the intuition. A strong natural law intuition, they would understand that if you're on an island, Crusoe and Friday, then Friday goes up and beats Crusoe and takes all his stuff, they would understand that, well, that's criminal. They don't need a state to tell them that it's criminal, they just understand it.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's in regards to the fact that, we are territorial animals. I think people kind of get defensive because they kind of empathetically look at that situation as if it had happened to them.
Yeah.
And then another scenario that I like arguing with people about, anyone who advocates democracy, I just ask them how they would feel about democracy in the 1850s in America. Oh, and anyway, I was going to go further into that. Anyway, we kind of observe natural law because everyone kind of has a sense of justice and everyone sees fit that we should have justice. But the implication of a justice system is that people own themselves and are responsible to their actions. And I think that this implication is clear just because in order for someone to be responsible to their actions, they have to be the ones controlling those actions, or at least semi in control of those actions.
Yes, and this is actually reminding me of a Frank Van Dunn paper about argumentation ethics. He was actually, Hoppe mentions this, he came up with argumentation ethics around about the same time Hoppe did, and they both worked on it almost parallel for like a number of years. Even they didn't know about each other's work, so he actually has a interesting perspective on it. And he, in his paper, I can't remember what he was talking about right now, but I'll send it into the DMs. He's basically applying argumentation ethics in a legal sense. Well, I mean, like, in a judicial sense. So like a judge can't go back on his word. It would be a contradiction for the judge to say, well, let's hear out both sides, and no matter what evidence is presented, I'm just going to rule in favor of the guy who's my friend. Stuff like that. Frank Van Daan has almost in some sense, a more nuanced view on it in his paper than Hoppe, and in some senses, a more straightforward view. So it's kind of difficult to understand in parts, but I think it'll be quite useful because you said you were making a paper on natural law, I think.
Yeah, it's about halfway done, but I'm kind of trying to explain this notion and that I've been having, just because every single time I kind of think about this stuff, I think, well, literally everything that society is and human interaction is based in this idea of self-ownership, necessarily, just because everything from law to consent to any kind of contract, any kind of dealing made, is founded in the idea that people have this kind of centralized control over themselves.
Yes, certainly, and I think it would be good for your paper to really have a strong sort of reference to argumentation there, because to make it really explicit that this isn't just a vague idea that people have. It's the only thing which could be rationally justified. As we're rational beings, we have to at least put on this hat of libertarians whenever we're debating. And in fact, I'll after the debate, I'll send you some other papers and stuff that I've read, and I can send you like my own writing on the topic. And please do send me your paper once it's done. I'd be very interested to read it.
All right. I am not super great at writing formal papers, but they're all grammatically correct at least, and
Yeah.
I think that they present some kind of I think that in some sense it might be some kind of extension of argumentation ethics. Uh, if I am familiar enough with argumentation ethics to expand upon it in any sense.
I mean, we could discuss that now to see where any gaps in your
Like,
knowledge might lie.
yeah, would you like to hear a rough 2 paragraphs?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Natural rights are a contentious topic. Being as they are metaphysical in nature, they are currently impossible to prove empirically. However, given our current understanding of the natural world and how we interact with it, it is clear to each and every man that there is some consciousness, and the reason that this distinction exists is that each and every man can irrefutably prove, at least unto himself, that he is conscious a priori. This is done through the oft-mentioned Cartesian dualism, aka cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Each man can come to recognize his own reality in some sense, even if it cannot be scientifically proven that such a consciousness even exists. Consciousness and how the human mind deals with it creates an observation of property rights. I'm going to go down and read the footnotes about that. 1. Cartesian dualism and all of its implications do not necessarily need to be accepted here in order to accept this premise. The main purpose of mentioning cogito ergo sum is to demonstrate a priori that some type of metaphysical presence is accepted by the individual when acting in nature. 2. It is extremely important here to note that the observation of rights is not a derivation of rights. Through an observation, we cannot justify rights at all. We can only say that in most cases we act as though they exist.
And
The
that's.
implications.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Would you like me to keep going?
Yeah, keep going.
The implications of consciousness are vast and many, but in my personal opinion, the most important is the fact that, given a consciousness, we at the very least believe ourselves to be somewhat rational actors. The indication of this idea is that we believe we make our own choices. The human social code is centered around this idea. If we do on any level make our own decisions, we as semi-rational actors are responsible for those actions in a literal sense. Not only are we responsible for the things our body does, but we also necessarily hold dictatorial control over our bodies. The implication of a dictatorial control by way of natural consequence could very easily be interpreted as ownership. So that's what I got so far.
That's certainly an interesting way of attacking it through basically just starting from consciousness and then seeing what we can get from that to get into some natural law. But I would say my ears perked up when you said prove empirically at the beginning there. I think it would be depending on what you mean by empirically. I think a video from Hoppe on Austrian methodology and the failure of at least empiricism in the logical positivist sense would be useful. So I'll send that to you as well.
Oh yeah, I might have seen that one actually. I've so far I've watched like thousands of hours of lectures, and I still feel like it's not enough.
Yeah, it's always the case. There's always more to learn.
Oh yeah, I'm currently trying to learn a lot of things right now. Trying to learn how to produce music, trying to learn how to engineer.
Add making YouTube videos to that list, because then once your paper's done, you can make it into a video.
I just might. I mean, I got all the equipment now.
Yeah, it'll be very exciting.
I think that I feel like there's a few things missing in between each of these paragraphs that I really want to add in, but I just don't know exactly how to put them there yet.
I think I assume you've read Ethics of Liberty, have you?
Yep.
I think even just going over the introduction to that, I find is a very strong summary of natural law in the modern Rothbardian understanding. Hoppe does a very good job of really hammering out why we should expect it to be the case that there is this natural law. You know, he doesn't go into great detail on argumentation ethics or anything like that, of course, but he really demonstrates why this is a perfectly rational position to take.
Yeah, I definitely agree that I think Austrian economics and natural law are the rational position to take, but I feel like the average person doesn't think enough about these things or much in general enough to kind of come to the conclusion that these things are rational. I think that they just kind of think things are the way they are because they are the way they are. So the point of what I'm trying to do right now is I'm trying to get people to use premises that they already necessarily accept. Probably 90% of people believe themselves to be consciousness or more, 99%. Some might believe that they're completely controlled by chemical influence in their brains, but I don't think most people accept that.
Yeah, I mean, in any case, those people could be ignored because, if they're just a chemical reaction going on and there's no thrust to their argument at all, there's no actual truth that they're getting at, then who cares,
Yeah, they're not exactly accepting a metaphysical reality to their being, I guess you could say. And they're kind of just claiming that they're just robotic, but I mean, I think that they, at least for themselves, understand that they have impulse that they can choose to act upon.
Certainly.
And it's not just that though. It's just like if you believe yourself to be completely automatic, that would mean that in every single scenario, people would probably always be seeking reproduction because that's kind of the goal of life, or they'd be seeking constant pleasure.
I mean, even the word seeking there kind of presupposes choice in a way. It's
yeah, I suppose.
This is our this is why praxeology is more useful rather than just going to boring determinism. It's I'm a determinist in the sense that if there was a choice, I don't think you could choose differently. I don't think I could have chosen differently than to go on this stream given the choice, because my value scale would be the same necessarily, right? But it's kind of just reductive in a way to just go, it's all meaningless, who cares? Well, I mean, if you don't care, then don't open your fucking mouth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're kind of proving themselves wrong about the nature of them caring when they actually, try to approach that conversation at all.
Yeah, I mean, maybe back onto natural law proper. Have you heard of like the various derivations, like deriving homesteading and whatnot from natural law?
I think so, but do you think you could brush me up real quick?
Sure. So
I'll let you know.
my derivation of homesteading, I don't know if this is like the standard one. I don't really see it in that many places, but my derivation of homesteading is basically, well, we have conflict avoidance, so therefore conflict initiation is not allowed because conflict initiation is the negation of conflict avoidance. So
Oh, like your
that's
Crusoe economics?
sorry.
Like your Crusoe Friday economics?
Yeah. So like I think you know it. It's basically like
Yeah.
Crusoe starts using a stick. It would necessarily be the late comer who's initiating conflict. So we have the first comer ethic, as Hoppe puts it, or the prior later
I have,
distinction.
I have no idea how people can dispute that. Like, I just don't understand that worldview.
Yeah, I mean, it's so intuitive and so rational. And also, I'm gonna send you a Kinsella article I just thought of on this topic, which goes over the prior later distinction. And Kinsella's argument for it is basically that, well, whenever there's a dispute over anything, people have to presuppose that possession is different from ownership. So therefore, a couple steps down the line, by Misesian regression, it has to be the first possessor, i.e., the homesteader, who has the rightful ownership over it.
Yeah, yeah. I think that what I feel when people try to dispute things like homesteading, I feel like it's indicative of the left kind of rejecting the nature of man. I think that's kind of like the whole foundation of progressivism. And if you look into early progressives, I mean, that's basically true. They kind of they were essentially like religious cultists in kind of a fashion. They thought that they'd bring a perfect world into existence by their action, um, and kind of reject human nature in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, whenever it comes to this, I'll be very interested to read your paper when it's finished.
Yeah, so I think that might sum up all the questions and things I wanted to bring to the table to you.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting chat. I hope to have more in the future.
All right, and I'll let you know when that paper's done.
Yeah, thank you, mate. See ya.
All right, thank you. Bye bye.
It was just a short boy today, eh? Proper debate tomorrow, so that one will be longer. Anyway, thanks for coming along, guys, and I'll see you tomorrow, I suppose. Boop.